The last time anyone saw them alive, they were joyfully shooting arrows in the tower's garden. Two boys, 12 and 9 years old, laughing as their arrows found their targets. Within weeks, they would disappear without a trace, leaving behind one of history's most terrifying mysteries. But here's the bone-chilling part: we know exactly who wanted them dead. We know who had the power and the motive. And despite over 5 centuries of investigation, we still can't prove what happened during those final terrifying moments. What you're about to hear isn't just another historical enigma. It's the story of how 2 innocent children became a deadly threat to England simply by existing. How their own uncle may have ordered their murder. How several influential figures had both the opportunity and the motive to kill them. And how recent discoveries, including a piece of jewellery found in 2024, are finally shedding light on their fate. I've spent countless hours examining contemporary records, studying forensic evidence, and analysing various theories. What I found will change the way you view this case. Because while historians argue over who gave the final order, they all agree on one chilling fact: these boys knew death was closing in on them. Imagine the scene. It's late July 1483, and inside the Tower of London, 12-year-old Edward V stands beside his bed. His physician, Dr. Argentine, would later report that Edward was seeking confession every day as though he believed his death was imminent. Picture that, 12 years old, supposedly safe in the royal residence, yet so certain of his own murder that he was preparing his soul for the afterlife. His younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, just 9 years old, had only recently joined him in the Tower. Their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, had desperately fought to keep Richard with her in sanctuary at Westminster Abbey. But on June 16th, under intense pressure and promises of safety, she allowed him to go. One chronicler would note darkly that Richard left never to see his mother again. Now, you might think the Tower of London sounds menacing, but wasn't it also a royal residence? You're right. Kings traditionally stayed there before their coronations. Edward V was supposed to be crowned on June 20th. Preparations were underway. The date was set, but that coronation would never take place. While the boys were playing in the Tower Gardens, their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was orchestrating a ruthless political manoeuvre. On June 13th, during a council meeting at the Tower, Richard suddenly accused Lord Hastings of treason. Within an hour, Hastings was dead beheaded in the courtyard with such speed that they didn't even have time to set up a proper scaffold. 3 days later, Richard's agents declared Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville invalid, claiming that Edward had been pre-contracted to marry another woman, which would make his children with Elizabeth illegitimate. Convenient, don't you think? With a single legal move, Richard turned his nephews from rightful heirs into bastards. On June 26th, Parliament formally offered Richard the crown, which he accepted with what historians describe as feigned reluctance. By July 6th, he was King Richard III, and those 2 boys in the Tower were no longer princes, they were problems. This is where the history becomes truly chilling. After Richard's coronation, sightings of the boys grew increasingly rare. The Great Chronicle of London provides us with the last confirmed sighting. The boys were often seen playing and shooting arrows in the garden of the Tower, but then, as reported by the Italian diplomat Dominic Mancini, they were moved into the inner apartments. Mancini's account, written for the French court that same year, includes a detail that sends chills down my spine. He describes how the boys were seen less and less often behind the bars and windows, until eventually they stopped appearing altogether. Imagine that 2 children trapped watching the world through bars, aware that each day might be their last. By the autumn of 1483, Mancini noted, "Already there is a suspicion that they have been done away with, but who would murder 2 children? And perhaps more importantly, who could... Let me take you through the prime suspects, starting with the man who had the most to gain and the easiest access. King Richard III. Richard controlled the Tower. He had declared the boys illegitimate. He sat on a throne that rightfully belonged to his older nephew. Every moment the boys lived, they posed a threat to his rule. Even though they were declared bastards, public opinion could shift. Loyalists could rally around them. In the brutal calculus of medieval power, their deaths made perfect sense. The circumstantial evidence against Richard is damning. He never produced the boys to counter the growing rumours of their deaths. He never blamed anyone else for their disappearance. When rebellions rose against him, using the princes' names, he could have ended them instantly by showing the boys alive. He didn't. Foreign observers were even more blunt than the English chroniclers. In January 1484, the Chancellor of France publicly declared that Edward IV's children had been murdered with impunity, and that the crown had been handed to their killer. This wasn't idle gossip, it was international condemnation. But wait until you hear about the confession. In 1502, a man named Sir James Tyrrell was arrested for treason against Henry VIII. Under interrogation in the Tower, the very place where the princes had disappeared, Tyrrell allegedly confessed to murdering them on Richard III's orders. According to his confession, Tyrrell recruited two men, Miles Forrest and John Dyan, to carry out the killings. The method: they waited until the boys were asleep, then smothered them with their pillows. After confirming their deaths, they buried the bodies at the foot of a staircase in the Tower, covering them with stones. Now, skeptics might argue that we don't have Tyrrell's original confession, only second-hand accounts written years later. But here's something those skeptics can't explain away. In 2024, researchers made a groundbreaking discovery. In a will from 1516, they found mention of a gold chain that had belonged to Edward V. Where was this invaluable piece of jewellery? In the possession of Sir James Tyrrell's family. Lady Margaret Capel, Tyrrell's sister-in-law, bequeathed to her son his father's chain, which had once belonged to young King Edward V. How did the alleged murderer's family come to possess the victim's personal jewellery? One theory sends a shiver down my spine. It was taken as proof that the deed had been done. But Richard III isn't the only suspect in this tragic tale. Some historians argue we've been focusing on the wrong king entirely. Enter Henry Tudor, who became Henry VIII, after defeating Richard at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. Henry's claim to the throne was weak at best. He was a distant Lancastrian with little royal blood. To strengthen his position, he married Elizabeth of York, the prince's older sister. But think about the implications of that. If either of the princes was still alive, they would have had a much stronger claim to the throne than Henry. The theory goes like this. What if Richard didn't kill the princes? What if he kept them alive, hidden away? When Henry took the throne in 1485, he may have discovered them still alive in the Tower, and to secure his own power, he had them quietly eliminated. It's not as far-fetched as it seems. Henry VIII proved more than willing to execute other rival claimants. In 1409, he had Edward, Earl of Warwick, another potential Yorkist heir, beheaded. Henry was ruthless when it came to safeguarding his crown. There's also the puzzling case of Elizabeth Woodville, the prince's mother. In 1487, just 2 years into Henry's reign, she suddenly lost all her lands and was forced into a convent. Why would Henry treat his own mother-in-law this way? One theory suggests that Elizabeth discovered that it was Henry, not Richard, who had killed her sons. However, there's a significant flaw in the theory that Henry VII was behind the murder. No contemporary source, not even Richard's most loyal supporters, ever accused Henry of killing the princes. If there had been even a whisper of suspicion, Richard's loyalists would have seized on it as propaganda, but they didn't. This leads us to the third major suspect, one whose betrayal would have cut the deepest. Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, was Richard's right-hand man during the usurpation. He helped arrest the prince's protectors and supported Richard's claim to the throne. By all accounts, Buckingham was Richard's most trusted ally until he wasn't. In October 1483, just months after Richard claimed the crown, Buckingham launched a rebellion. The rebellion failed miserably, and Buckingham was executed on November 2nd, but the timing is highly suspicious. The princes disappeared sometime between July and October 1483, and Buckingham rebelled in October. Could these two events be linked? What makes Buckingham a plausible suspect is his royal bloodline. He descended from Edward III on both sides of his family. With the princes declared illegitimate and out of the way, Buckingham was actually quite high in the line of succession. He also had the opportunity. While Richard went on royal progress that summer, Buckingham remained in London, holding significant power and influence. One particularly intriguing piece of evidence comes from a Portuguese chronicle written within years of the event, which claims that the Duke of Buckingham ordered the children to be starved to death. Not smothered with pillows, but slowly, cruelly starved. It's a different story, but it comes from a source with no apparent agenda. In 1880, researchers uncovered another bombshell. In the College of Arms in London, they found a Tudor-era document stating that the princes were killed by the vice of the Duke of Buckingham, by his advice, by his counsel, by his design. Could Buckingham have acted alone without Richard's knowledge? It seems highly unlikely. The Tower was a fortress, its constable appointed by the king. For Buckingham to murder the princes without Richard finding out would require the spectacular incompetence on Richard's part or willful blindness. But what if that's exactly why they fell out? What if Buckingham killed the princes either on his own initiative or thinking he was doing Richard a favour and Richard discovered it? That could explain the sudden violent rift between the two former allies. Yet even this theory has its holes. If Richard was innocent and Buckingham was guilty, why didn't Richard publicly denounce Buckingham for the crime? After Buckingham's rebellion and execution, it would have been the perfect opportunity to clear his own name, but Richard didn't. And wait, there's one more possibility that changes everything. What if the princes weren't murdered at all? I know, it sounds impossible, but hear me out. In 2023, researcher Philip Langley, the same woman who uncovered Richard III's remains under a parking lot, claimed to have discovered new evidence. According to her research, documents in European archives suggest that at least one of the princes survived into the 1490s. The evidence includes a 1493 manuscript supposedly written by Richard, Duke of York, detailing his escape from the Tower. Another document suggests that Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian III examined a young man who claimed to be the missing prince, and verified his identity using birthmarks only the real Richard would have. Remember Perkins Warbeck? From 1491 to 1497, this young man claimed to be Richard, Duke of York. He garnered support from powerful figures including Margaret of Burgundy, the boy's aunt, and James IV of Scotland. Henry VIII eventually captured him, and Warbeck confessed to being an imposter before his execution. But what if he wasn't lying the first time? Even more intriguing, researchers have found references to a mysterious figure in Devon known locally as the Prince's Ghost. It's said that Edward V lived under an assumed identity in rural England. This folklore persisted for generations. Now, I'll be honest with you, most historians dismiss these survival theories. The evidence is fragmentary, often ambiguous, and lacks the kind of verification needed to overturn 5 centuries of accepted history. However, the fact that such theories even exist highlights a fundamental issue with this case. We simply don't have conclusive proof of what really happened. This brings us to the physical evidence, or rather the bones. In 1674, workmen renovating the Tower of London made a grim discovery. Beneath a staircase, they found a wooden box containing 2 small skeletons. Given the persistent legend that the princes had been buried at the stairfoot, these bones were immediately assumed to be the missing boys. King Charles II had the remains interred in Westminster Abbey in an urn bearing the princes' names. Case closed, right? Not quite. In 1833, the urn was opened and the bones examined. The analysis concluded that they belonged to 2 children of approximately the right ages, one around 10, the other around 12. However, the examination couldn't determine their sex, confirm their identity, or use methods we now consider reliable. Modern scientists have pointed out numerous flaws in the 1933 analysis. The age estimates could be off by years, and the sex determination was essentially guesswork. Without DNA testing, we can't even confirm if these are the bodies of children from the 15th century, let alone specifically Edward V and Richard, Duke of York. The solution seems obvious. Test the bones with modern techniques and compare the deity to known descendants of the Yorkist line. But here's the frustrating part. Authorities won't allow it. The Church of England and the Crown have repeatedly refused requests to re-examine the bones, citing religious and ethical concerns about disturbing royal graves. So we're left in a maddening situation. The potential proof of the prince's fate sits in Westminster Abbey, just out of reach of modern science. Those bones could finally answer our questions once and for all, or they could deepen the mystery if they turn out to belong to someone else entirely. Let me paint a picture of those final days based on what we do know. By the late summer of 1483, the boys were confined to the inner chambers of the tower. No more archery in the garden. No more playing in the sun. Just 2 children trapped behind bars and windows, watching their world shrink day by day. Edward V at 12 was old enough to grasp the danger closing in on him. His daily confessions to Dr. Argentine paint the picture of a boy preparing for death. Can you imagine the conversations between the brothers? The older one trying to comfort the younger, while both fought their own terror. They must have heard the hammering as workers prepared for a coronation that would never include them. They would have noticed the servants growing fewer, the visitors stopping altogether. They would have wondered why their mother didn't come, why their sisters stayed away, why their uncle the king never called them to court. And then one night, we don't know exactly when someone came for them. Whether it was Tyrrell and his henchmen Buckingham's agents or someone else entirely, the outcome was the same. 2 boys who should have been kings were murdered for the crime of existing, or were they? What keeps me up at night about this case is this: every single piece of evidence we have is circumstantial. Every confession is second-hand. Every theory has holes you could drive a medieval cart through. We have no bodies definitively identified as the princes. We have no direct eyewitness accounts of their murder. We have no smoking gun document ordering their deaths. What we have instead is negative evidence. The fact that they vanished and were never seen again. This absence of evidence has created a vacuum which has been filled with 5 centuries of speculation, propaganda, and myth-making. Shakespeare's play Richard III did more to convict Richard in the public mind than any historical document ever could. The image of the evil hunchbacked uncle murdering his angelic nephews is seared into our collective consciousness. But Shakespeare was writing under the Tudor dynasty with every incentive to blacken Richard's name. The earliest detailed account of the murders comes from Thomas More, who was a child when the events occurred, writing decades later under Henry VIII. Can we trust sources with such obvious political agendas? Recent discoveries have given us tantalizing glimpses of the truth. Edward Favi's chain found in the possession of his alleged murderer's family. Documents suggesting survival that challenge the accepted narrative. Each new piece of evidence reminds us that this case isn't closed. It's still an active investigation 5 centuries cold but not forgotten. What strikes me most about this case is how it strips away the romanticized veneer of medieval monarchy to reveal the brutal reality beneath. These weren't fairy tale princes in a storybook castle. They were real children with real fears caught in a deadly game of power they never asked to play. The Tower of London still stands today, transformed from a prison to a tourist attraction. Thousands of visitors walk through its gates daily, many pausing at the bloody tower where tradition says the princes met their end. The spot where the boys supposedly played their last games is marked. The staircase where the bones were discovered is noted in guidebooks, but the tower keeps its secrets. Somewhere within those ancient stones, 2 boys disappeared. Whether they died quickly at an assassin's hands or slowly from neglect, whether they escaped to live in exile or were coldly executed, we may never know. The tower witnessed the truth, but stone walls don't talk. The princes in the tower remind us that history isn't always neat and some mysteries resist solution, no matter how hard we dig. They remind us that power corrupts, that children have always been casualties of political ambition, and that even royal blood offers no protection when thrones are at stake. Modern investigators continue to search for answers. Archives yield occasional surprises and technology advances offering new ways to examine old evidence. Perhaps one day a researcher will uncover the document that solves everything. Perhaps the Westminster Abbey bones will finally be tested. Perhaps some European archive holds the key. Until then, we're left with a mystery that refuses to die. 2 boys who vanished, a cast of suspects with blood on their hands, a crime scene that's now a tourist attraction, and questions that have echoed through 5 centuries. Who killed the princes in the tower? How did they die? Where are their bodies? Did they somehow, against all odds, survive? The fact that we're still asking these questions, still investigating, still arguing about the answers, tells us something important. Some stories transcend their historical moment. Some mysteries matter not because they can be solved, but because they force us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, ambition, and the price of crowns. As I finish this investigation, I keep returning to that image from Dominic Mancini, 2 boys behind bars and windows appearing less and less until they vanished altogether. It's a haunting metaphor for how they've slipped through history's fingers, visible one moment, gone the next, leaving only questions in their wake. The princes in the tower didn't just disappear from the Tower of London, they disappeared from history itself, leaving a void that we've been trying to fill ever since. And maybe that's their true legacy, not as victims, martyrs, or political symbols, but as an eternal reminder that some truths can be lost forever, and some mysteries are destined to endure. What do you think happened to them after everything you've heard? The evidence, the theories, there's discoveries. Who do you believe killed the princes in the tower? Or do you think, against all probability, that somewhere in medieval Europe 2 boys started new lives under new names, leaving their royal past behind? Drop your theory in the comments below. If this historical mystery fascinated you, check out this video where I investigate another royal crime that changed the course of history. Until next time, remember, history's greatest mysteries are often hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally uncover the truth. Thank you everyone for watching the whole video. Please like and subscribe to watch more good videos.